D&D number 3, Finding Home in Jesus' Name, Chapter 3. Lisa availed herself of every foul word she'd ever heard, cursing under her breath as she threw off handles and rummaged through the suitcase that sat open on the passenger seat. She'd shopped at several outlet malls as she traveled across the country, adding to what she'd initially brought with her when she'd stormed out of the penthouse. She hadn't gone crazy shopping, but she had bought the bare necessities like clothing, shoes, and of course the luggage to hold them. What she looked for currently were the Nike runners that she'd purchased back in Amarillo. She needed them so she could run out her frustrations. Her escorts had watched from their rigs as she'd circled rest areas and truck stops. Today, she was glad she'd bought those shoes as she was about to go on a little hike. Finding one shoe, she tucked it in her lap and went back to search for the mate while she continued to rant. The needle says a quarter tank. A quarter tank. How can I be out of gas? She found the second shoe and plunged her hand around in the bag looking for some socks. Stupid car, out of gas. Why? Why now? She mumbled. Why not when she'd had two truckers driving beside her who could have helped her out? Well, probably because they hadn't allowed her gas to get below half a tank, she admitted. Finally, finding what she sought, she sat back in the driver's seat and pulled on the shoes and socks. She knew she probably had at least a couple more miles to go to reach her grandmother's place. The walk was nothing to Lisa since she was used to working out every day, but she didn't want to make it in sandals. She finished tying her shoes, stood, grabbed her trucker's hat, a gift from Hank, and stuffed her hair up inside it to keep it off her neck. Catching a glimpse of herself in the car window, she made a face at the hat. Cute, she muttered. She'd considered calling a service station or tow truck, but she knew she was very close to her destination and decided she'd wait to see her grandparents and ask them whom she should call. Lisa tucked her purse into her suitcase so she wouldn't have to carry anything, backed out of the car and slammed the door. Pointing the remote to lock the car, she listened for the beep, stuffed the keys in her pocket and started walking, but stopped suddenly. Backing up, she turned and delivered a fierce kick to the tire. Take that, you candy apple red piece of junk. When she'd first realized she was out of gas, she thought she would walk back to town. However, she figured she was probably closer to her destination than she was to town. Close to her destination. She smiled at the thought. After 5 days on the road, she was almost there. Bill, her friendly trucker, had been right about asking anyone in town. She'd stopped at a convenience store just inside the city limit and asked the clerk if she knew where the Lewis place was located. The clerk and two customers had joined in to give her directions to the Lewis home, apparently a very large, very old farmhouse situated between two ranches on a dirt road about 3 or 4 miles out of town that you can't miss. Or should we say that you can't miss? Very picturesque, just like a postcard, they'd said. Lisa had been so excited about being so close, she hadn't bothered to gas up. She had a quarter tank anyway, or so she thought. She should have been just fine. Oh, well. She made a mental note to have the gas gauge repaired. The walk wasn't so bad, well, other than the heat and the humidity. It was very warm for May, she thought, but that was also probably par for the course in Middle Georgia. Regardless, lovely large trees, giant hardwoods mixed with tall pines, lined the road and gave plenty of shade on her left side. A split-rail fence edged the road on her right. Looking past the fence, across green fields dotted with a few giant trees, she could see a large brick home way up on a hill, surrounded by thousands of acres of lush green land. The home was like something out of Gone with the Wind, with white columns in front. Lisa wished she could get closer and examine the detail. The dense woods to her left made her glad that she'd run out of gas in the middle of the day. Who knew what kind of animals lived in there? She gave a shudder, drew a deep breath, and pasted a smile on her face, turning her mind to more positive things. The fragrance of pine and earth acted like a balm for her soul and lifted her spirits considerably. She'd heard about Georgia pines. They really were quite pleasant. According to the directions given her, she had one more turn to make. The road she was on would dead end at the dirt road, where the farmhouse was located. She would turn left on that dirt road because, as they said, you can't turn right, lest you want to visit the Stewart Ranch. She looked up to her right again. The large brick mansion must be the Stewart homestead. Looking back over her shoulder, she could no longer see her car, and she wondered how much farther the dirt to the dirt road. The question was quickly answered as she rounded the next bend. The blacktop she walked definitely ended at a dirt road. Lisa was glad that so far their directions had been right on, except no one had said anything about a gate closing off the dirt road from the public roadway. Nevertheless, there was a large metal gate swung across the roadway, bearing a large sign that read, "Cattle Crossing, Do Not Enter." Lisa climbed up on the gate and peered down the dirt road. There was no cattle in sight, not on the road to her left, nor on the Stewart land to her right. Directly across, there was nothing but dense woods. Looking back left, she noticed, not far down the road, on the left-hand side, a high privacy fence began. That's it, she thought. That's my grandparents' land, just a jog away. So many emotions swam through her: excitement, relief, gratitude, and yeah, a little fear, for she didn't know what she would do if she was rejected. She'd come this far, though, and she wasn't going to let fear hold her back. Looking again to her right, she noticed another wide gate similar to the one upon which she stood. It led to what she decided must be the Stewart land and was propped open with a big rock. Next to that gate, just inside the property, was a jeep, pretty well covered with red dirt and rust. Lisa had no intention of letting some stupid gate keep her from her destination. How dare they think that they can close off a public road anyway? People have some nerve. Carefully, Lisa eased herself up and over the gate, jumping down the last few feet. "Nothing to it," she mumbled, brushing off her white shorts and straightening her sleeveless, purple flowered blouse. She started off down the road. When she got to where the privacy fence began, she tried to peek through but couldn't see anything. "I guess that's why they call it a privacy fence," she mused aloud. Walking happily along, she lightly ran her hand over the rough wood of the fence as she passed. She tried to not look across the road into the dark woods because they gave her the creeps. She wasn't used to rural areas. She was used to hotels and penthouse apartments and swimming pools and malls. She thought for a moment she heard some kind of animal noises coming from the woods. It was probably just her imagination, but still she picked up her pace. And peering down the road, she looked for a break in the privacy fence that would indicate an entrance to the farm, but all she could see was solid fence as it disappeared around a curve in the road. Then she did see something. Something horrifying. A large cow came trotting around the bend, heading straight toward her. Then another, and another, and then the road was full of them. Unable to move forward any longer, Lisa turned, pressing her back against the fence in an effort to get out of the way. It didn't seem to help. They were close to stepping on her toes, bumping into her, pushing her into the fence. She began to panic, thinking she was going to be squashed to death. Looking for a way out, she realized the woods across the street that she'd been so afraid of just might be her only hope. If she could make it across the street, she could take refuge in there. She pushed at one of the cows as it passed, then grunted as its backside rammed her into the fence, taking her breath away. The excruciating, sudden pain in her side caused her to make the decision. She'd better get across that road. Decision made, she darted out between the large animals. Trying to make her way across the sea of brown reminded her of an old video game where a frog tries to cross a highway without getting squashed. She wasn't doing very well. She was maybe halfway across when one of the big, fat, stupid cows stomped on her toe. Ow! Instinctively, she bent down toward her foot, which turned out to be a mistake. Her head hit the hip of the next animal, and she became disoriented. Stumbling, she raised her hand to her forehead. The animals didn't seem to care two figs that they were shoving her all over the road, she thought indignantly. It was as if they were consciously trying to knock her down and stomp on her. Lisa was getting worried. Being jostled by huge beasts was not her version of fun. Something hit her head from behind. Dizzy now, she stumbled forward and smacked her face on a rump. Ugh, she grunted as her hands covered her nose. When she pulled them away, they were covered with blood, and it dawned on her that she was in real trouble. There was virtually no space now between each animal. Wedged in on all sides, she could barely breathe. Lightheaded, her vision blurring, she knew she was going down. And when the next cow tossed its head back at her and hit her in the jaw, it was all over. New scene. Chaz Stewart took his hat off, wiped his face with his sleeve. "Hot as heck today," his friend Josh nodded. "Too hot for May. Just be glad it's not raining. I don't know, rain would feel pretty good right about now. Chaz put his hat back on, pulled back on the reins when his chestnut BB danced sideways. Whoa, girl, there now. They were almost finished for the day. The last leg of herding cattle to the spring pastures down the small dirt road was the easiest part, like running them down a chute. Josh turned in the saddle and waved at the two friends bringing up the rear. I'm starving. Can't wait to grab a beer and pizza at Joe's. I'm with you, Chaz grunted. Something caught his eye and he peered down the road where they were coming up on the Lewis place. What the hell? Did you see that? Josh looked up. What? Chaz raised up in his stirrups. There's someone in the road. He dug his boots into BB's sides, springing ahead. Maneuvering between the cattle, he caught a glimpse of a girl in a brown cap, her face covered in blood. His heart raced. It seemed to take him forever to get to her side, and just as he did, she began sliding limply down toward the ground. Instinctively, he grabbed for the back of her shirt and yanked her into the air, but the shirt buttons flew, the shirt front tore open, and she started sliding out. He jerked her toward him and was barely able to catch her against his chest. She was out cold. Chaz made it through the gate to his place and left Josh to deal with the cattle. He didn't have to go far for his medical box. The Jeep was parked only a few yards inside the gate. He swung off a BB, pulling the girl with him, and laid her down gently on the grass. Just inside the gate, Josh maneuvered his horse between the Jeep and the cattle to make sure the beasts stayed on course and didn't venture toward the girl on the ground. Chaz threw off his hat, grabbed his medical box, and swung it down to the grass to rest beside the girl. He checked her for injuries, took her pulse, listened to her heart. He reached to remove the hat from her head so he could check her pupils, and mounds of vibrant red curls tumbled down, taking his breath away. Sweet Lord. The discovery made him look closer at her. The entire row of buttons was missing from the front of her shirt, which lay open. Blood from her nose stained her white lacy bra. This was not a young girl, as he supposed. This was a woman, a freaking gorgeous woman. He watched her breasts rise and fall, telling himself he was simply making sure she was breathing. Her taut body was tan and lean, and he shook himself, forced himself to focus. He opened his box and began an examination. Her pupils were reactive, her breathing clear. He ran his hand over her head, looking for injuries. Hey, sweetheart, he whispered. Come on now. You've been out too long. Wake up. He pulled out the blood pressure monitor and wrapped the cuff around her arm. While the machine pumped the cuff, he ran his hands over her arms and ribs, looking for broken bones. Lisa kept her eyes closed as she came back to reality. She knew a man held her down. She knew her shirt was open and his hands moved over her body. If he thought she would simply lie still while he had his way with her, he could think again. She stretched her fingers out slowly, hoping to find a rock or something within reach to use as a weapon. Her hand closed around a small, curved machine, maybe one of those old personal CD players. Holding her breath, she lifted it and swung it at the man's head. Chaz caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye. He moved quickly, but not enough to be missed altogether. He grunted as the blood pressure monitor grazed his temple. He rolled and came up quickly. What the hell? Lisa rose up, intending to strike again, but he grabbed her by the wrist and wrested the machine from her grasp. What do you think you're doing? I'm keeping you from... She stopped when she noticed the stethoscope hanging around his neck. Her eyes moved to the blood pressure monitor in his hand. Only then did she realize the cuff was still attached to her arm. You're a doctor? Paramedic. Oh, she murmured, her eyes darting up to meet his. I'm so sorry I hit you. I thought you were trying to... He held his hand up. I get it. She put her hand to her head and swayed. He took her by the shoulders. You're white as a ghost. You need to sit down. She didn't argue, but sank down immediately. I think I'm going to be sick. Great. She turned away on all fours, heaving violently. Chaz moved behind her and held her mass of hair out of the way, and when she finished, he handed her some gauze as a makeshift cloth. Wiping her mouth, she turned to sit. Thank you. Do you mind if I check your pupils? He asked sardonically. She smiled sweetly. Go ahead. I promise to behave. As he did his doctor thing, she looked him over. He was a large man, scruffy and dirty. No wonder she didn't recognize him as a doctor or a paramedic or whatever. He was very tan, with golden blonde hair and dark eyes. The classic chiseled jaw and wide mouth made her think of the G.I. Joe army figures. The cowboy hat lying nearby gave her imagination an even more intriguing picture. Do you hurt anywhere? He asked. My nose and my side. He tore at some plastic and held a cold pack out to her. Here, put this on your nose and lie down. Lie down? Yes, lie down. I'm going to see if anything's broken. She sighed and did as she was told. He began running his hands over her ribs, just below her breasts, then moved out and down. She winced as he zeroed in on one spot, about 6 inches below her right armpit, and he pressed again. Ow, that hurts. He watched her face as he pressed. Her eyes were the greenest green he'd ever seen. Her face, though dirty and bloody, was a perfect heart shape. Yep, she is a real looker. He pulled himself back to the medical analysis. Your ribs are bruised, could be broken. You need x-rays. No, I'm sure it's okay. He shrugged. Your call. No x-rays. Besides, I really need to get going. Which brings me to my next question, which is, where are you going, and what in the heck were you doing walking down that road? It was closed off, or can't you read? She sat up and sneered right back at him. That was more than one question. And yes, I can read. I ran out of gas a mile or so up the road. I knew I didn't have far to go, and I started walking. I've come a really long way and wasn't going to let some closed gate keep me from my destination. Who do you think you are, anyway, closing off a public road whenever you feel like it? Lady, we've been running our cattle on that road every fall and spring for the last 80 years or more, and I don't think we need your permission. Folks round here know what's what. No one has ever been stupid enough to walk down a road that's closed to a cattle crossing. Well, you shouldn't just assume that only townsfolk would be using the road. Townsfolk or no, the sign was posted. You could have been hurt a lot worse than some broken ribs. Well, I wasn't, so let's just drop it, okay? He shook his head in disgust. Fine, okay. So who are you, and what are you doing down this way? I mean, there's nothing down here. Maybe you took a wrong turn. She pressed her lips together. Should she tell him who she is? If he works on this ranch, he'll find out soon enough. My name is Lisa. Lisa Lewis. My grandmother lives somewhere on this road. Chaz's mouth fell open. Lisa? Little Lisa? Well, what do you know? I don't know about little Lisa, but yes, I'm Lisa. He looked at her appreciatively. Yeah, I don't know about little either. Suddenly, self-conscious, she tugged at the pieces of her shirt, trying to pull it together. You know who I am? Sure. Everyone knows who you are. Maddie keeps your picture on her refrigerator. Everyone knows about when Louise Lewis got pregnant and took off. You're all Maddie ever talks about. Maddie? Yeah, Maddie, you know, your grandmother. Lisa felt her face redden. How could she tell him no? She didn't know. I can't believe she didn't say anything to me about you coming. Well, she doesn't know. You're kidding. Lisa shook her head. It was an impulsive thing. I wasn't even sure if I could find my way here. An impulsive thing? Some things happened in my life, and I felt the need to find my roots. He nodded. Well, when things get rough, coming home is the best thing to do. He stood and offered her his hand. I'm Chaz. Lisa let him pull her to her feet. Chaz? Nickname for Charles. Charles Anthony Stewart III. Fancy name. For a not-so-fancy guy. He touched her shoulder. Still feeling dizzy? I don't think so. She sighed, feeling a little guilty about causing so much trouble. Listen, thanks for rescuing me. Yeah, you're welcome. You said your last name is Stewart? That's right. Then this is your ranch? My family's ranch. My father and I run it. She nodded. So, I guess I was pretty lucky that a paramedic came upon me right when I was being attacked by vicious killer cows. He laughed. Cows are extremely passive. We were moving them from the south pasture for the spring. And you just happened to be a paramedic in your spare time? I was. I'm a Marine. I was a corpsman. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and 1 for the Pine County Fire Department. She smiled. So she'd been right about the G.I. Joe. Impressive. Whatever. He turned and grabbed a towel out of his Jeep along with a bottle of water, poured the water over the towel, and handed it to her. Here, for your face. Thanks. She wiped the blood from her face the best she could. I can't see my grandmother looking like this, she said, tugging on her torn shirt. She looked up at him. Do you think I could bum a ride back to my car? He nodded as he gathered his medical supplies and threw the box into the back of the Jeep. I just need to take care of Bibi. He grabbed his hat, pushed his hair back, and placed it on his head, then turned and helped her into the Jeep, looking up as riders approached. Hey, so is she okay? Josh asked, nodding toward Lisa. Chaz reached behind his seat and pulled out the windbreaker jacket he kept there and handed it to Lisa. She tugged it around her modestly. Lisa Lewis, meet Josh Edwards. He nodded past Josh to two others. And that's Evan. And the big dude there is Troy. Their neighbors come to help me drive the cattle. Lisa smiled. Hi. Each man grabbed the tip of their hat and nodded. Lisa Lewis, as in Maddie's Lisa? Josh asked. One and the same, Chaz confirmed. I've got to get her to her car. Can you take care of Bibi for me? No problem, Josh said as he dismounted. Let me get the gate. Lisa watched as Josh went to open the gate that had closed the road to the public. Chaz cranked up the Jeep. Thanks. Catch you guys later. He put the Jeep in gear and took off. That is one fine-looking lady, Troy muttered as he watched them drive away. Josh grabbed Bibi's reins and remounted. Yes, she is. Chaz doctored her up, Evan mused. Josh nodded. Well, now, that's interesting, Troy said. Josh snapped the reins. Let's get to work. New scene. Chaz pulled up to the red Corvette. This is your car? She smiled. It's mine, all right. So Maddie's Lisa is doing pretty well for herself. She shrugged. It was a birthday present from someone. Wow, that's some present. As it turned out, it didn't mean much of anything. It's just a car. So you and the person who gave it to you are on the outs, to say the very least. He frowned. But you kept the car. She glanced at him as she unlocked the passenger side door and began rummaging through her suitcase to find another shirt. I don't think I like your tone. He shrugged. Call it like I see it. She stood up. Well, see this, then. I was owed, and for a lot more than this car is worth. His eyes shuddered. Whatever. He didn't want to insult her, mostly because she was Maddie's pride and joy, but he'd come close to telling her that some things shouldn't be for sale. She glared at him as she jerked the torn shirt from her body. Oh, Chaz muttered as he quickly turned around. When he turned back, she was dressed in a yellow tank top. She looked down at her shorts and let go of a string of curses. Chaz's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? She looked up. Yeah, well, sorry if I offended your fine sensibilities, she said sarcastically. When I get upset, I tend to curse. He shrugged. It doesn't bother me. It's just that the language doesn't match the angelic face. She snorted in response as she started going through the suitcase again. So, what has you all upset? There's blood all over my shorts, too. Chaz watched as she leaned into the back seat and began digging in another bag, presumably for more shorts. He couldn't help but watch her as she moved back and forth. Finally, she straightened, shaking out a pair of jeans. These will have to do. She toed off her shoes and then looked up as she unfastened her shorts, her eyebrows arched. He sighed and turned away. I'm decent, she said a minute later. He turned back. She was putting her shoes back on. What kind of woman was this creature? She thought nothing of dressing right there in the middle of the road and right in front of him. She thought nothing of leaving her boyfriend, yet accepted his car as a gift. He shook his head. Women. Nevertheless, he offered to take her to Maddie's and then come back to gas up her car and deliver it to her, as any Southern gentleman would do. He loaded her and her belongings into the Jeep and headed to the Lewis farmhouse. As he drove, he didn't miss her wringing her hands in anticipation. Well, this should be interesting, he thought. He was glad he would be there for Maddie. Lisa held tight to the edge of her seat as Chaz swung the Jeep through the gate, and her mouth fell open. It was like stepping back in time. She was reminded of the Waltons' homestead on the old TV series. A giant oak stood in the center of a huge front lawn surrounded by lilies and a circle of large rocks. Wind chimes and a birdhouse hung from its lower branches. The house was large and white with a full wraparound porch, and to the right of the house was a grove of what Lisa decided Must be some kind of fruit-bearing trees. And beyond those, toward the back, were giant trees. She was pretty sure were pecan trees. And to the left of the house, surrounded by a high chain-link fence, was a piece of land plowed into neat furrows, with some green plants coming up out of the ground, the variety of which Lisa had no idea. Chaz drove up the gravel drive that circled around to the front walk. Braking sharply, he jumped from the vehicle and gathered Lisa's baggage. He stopped, raised his eyebrows at her. "You coming?" She looked nervously at the house, then back to Chaz. He immediately regretted his abrupt manner. She was afraid. He'd never known her to come to visit her grandmother until now. Obviously, she'd come when she was little because the picture Maddie proudly displayed was taken in front of the house. She'd probably never been back since, until now. Well, it's about time, he thought. He went around to help her down. "Maddie's a great lady. You'll like her." Lisa smiled nervously. "I'm sure I will." He put the bags down and offered his hand. "She'll like you too. Come on." She swallowed and took his hand. It was warm and large and strong, and even once she stepped onto solid ground, she still didn't want to let go. They had had a rough beginning, her and Chaz, as first meetings go, but in this, he seemed to be her ally. As if he could sense her dilemma, he pressed his free hand on top of hers. "It's going to be okay." She smiled at him and nodded. "Thanks." They started toward the house when the front door swung open and a small, elf-like woman stepped out onto the porch. "Chaz, how very nice of you to come, and you've brought a friend. That's wonderful." She motioned with her hands. "Come in, come in." Chaz stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Maddie, I've brought someone who's more than just a friend. I brought someone you know." "You have?" Maddie picked up the glasses that dangled on a string and placed them neatly on her face. Lisa watched. All she could think of was Mrs. Claus. Her grandmother squinted at her, touching her chin as she tried to figure out who Lisa was. Lisa had mercy on her. "It's me, grandmother. It's Lisa." There was a gasp as Maddie's hands flew to her cheeks. "Lisa? Oh, my little Lisa!" She started for the steps, but Lisa moved quickly up to the porch so her grandmother wouldn't have to come down. She bent down to be enfolded in her grandmother's arms. "Lisa, oh, Lisa, what are you doing here? Oh, listen to me. It doesn't matter. The important thing is you're here. You're really here. Oh, dear. Come in. Please come in." She held Lisa's arm in an iron fist and pulled her through the door. She turned back, remembering Chaz. "Oh, Chaz, come in, dear." He grinned. "I'm coming. Just grabbing these bags." Maddie's hands flew over Lisa's face. "Let me look at you. My, you're just about the prettiest girl I've ever seen. Don't you think so, Chaz?" "Definitely," he chuckled as the screen door swung shut. "Where do you want these?" "Oh, dear, let me think. I suppose the green room is the cleanest right now. Besides, it's one of the few that has its own bathroom. Yes, the green room will be fine." "Yes, ma'am," he said as he headed up the wide staircase. Maddie frowned now as she continued looking Lisa over. "Is that blood on your cheek? And your nose is all red. Have you been crying?" "No, I had a little accident on the way here." "Oh, no. But I'm okay, grandmother. Really, I'm okay." "Well, good then, but you just simply must stop all this formal grandmother stuff. I'm either Grams or Maddie to all the folks round here. Nothing as formal as grandmother." Lisa smiled. "Okay, Grams sounds good." "Wonderful. Now, are you hungry? When did you eat last? It's almost supper time." "I'm not too hungry right now." "Nonsense. You must have been traveling all day. I'm sure you're starving." "She's not hungry, probably because she was knocked unconscious by a bunch of vicious cows not too long ago." Lisa frowned up at Chaz as he came down the steps. "Nonsense," Grams repeated. "Cows are extremely passive." Chaz raised his eyebrows at Lisa. "Told ya." Lisa giggled. "Knocked unconscious, you say?" Maddie asked. "Actually, Maddie, if she gets some rest and doesn't feel any dizziness or nausea, she can eat a little something in a few hours. She should be able to keep it down." Maddie nodded. "You're the doc." When Lisa started to disagree, Chaz interrupted. "Well, I've got to be getting on. If you need me, you know the number." He leaned forward and kissed Maddie on the forehead. Lisa was amazed. Her grandmother actually blushed. Chaz turned to her and held out his hand. "It's been a pleasure and an adventure." Lisa raised her nose in the air as she shook his hand. "I'm sure." Chaz grinned as he waltzed out the door. New scene. Come in, Lisa called at the soft knock on her door. Grams pushed open the door and stepped in carrying a tray. The aromas drifting from the tray immediately had Lisa's mouth watering as Maddie set the tray down on the bed. "How are you feeling, dear?" Grams asked. Lisa sighed with a smile. She'd been told to rest by both her grandmother and the local ex-paramedic, and she'd done just that. The hot bubble bath in the giant tub had been heavenly, topped only by snuggling down into the soft bed and breathing in the fresh-smelling sheets. No fabric softener smelled this fresh. They must have dried out in the sunshine. "I feel wonderful, Grams," she said as she sat up and leaned back against the headboard. "Well, good then." She reached for Lisa's hand. "I'm so happy you've come to visit," Grams uttered softly. "My prayers have been answered." Lisa had no idea what to say to that. Grams turned and lifted the tray and placed it on Lisa's lap and handed her a fork. "Here, I hope you like it. It's my famous chicken pot pie." Lisa took a small sample. The crust simply melted in her mouth. The chicken was juicy and tender, the carrots and peas and onions sweet and fresh. She moaned in ecstasy. Grams clapped her hands together. "I think that means you like it." "This is absolutely gourmet delicious." "That's exactly what everyone says. I'm so glad you like it. There's plenty more where that came from." Lisa scooped up another bite. "This is wonderful. Maybe while I'm here you can teach me some of your secrets. I've never cooked, but I'd love to learn." "Ah, you're speaking to my heart," Grams laughed. "How long do you think you'll be able to stay?" Lisa grimaced. "About that. I don't know exactly how to ask this, but actually, I was hoping that instead of just a short visit, you would let me stay here a while." "You mean like live here? With me?" "If you think it would be too much, I'll understand. I can pay you rent, I mean." Maddie frowned furiously. "Nonsense! Too much! Oh, Lisa, you asking to stay are the only words you could have spoken that could make me feel any happier. Of course you can stay, as long as you like." Lisa smiled. Graham sounded as if she really meant it. Wasn't that odd? This woman barely knew her. Lisa could be a psycho killer for all Grams knew. Maybe that's how it is with most families. They simply love to be around each other. But would her grandfather feel the same way? What about grandfather? Will he mind? "Oh, dear," Graham sighed, taking Lisa's hand. "I'm sorry, Lisa, but your grandfather passed away 5 years ago. Heart attack. It was very sudden." Lisa barely knew the man, so why did she suddenly feel like curling up in a ball and crying her eyes out? Maybe it was because of the missed opportunity to get to know him. "I'm so sorry, Grams. You must miss him very much." "Yes, yes, I do. But it's okay, dear. He's waiting for me, and he watches over me." Lisa smiled. What a pleasant thought. Then something struck her. Does does Lou know that her father passed away?" Graham stood, wringing her hands. Louise had a lot going on at that time. There was really no way she could have pulled herself away for the funeral. But to answer your question, yes, she knew. Dr. Stewart helped me to track her down. "Dr. Stewart? You mean Chaz?" Graham shook her head. "No, Chaz's mother, Patricia Stewart. She's a doctor at Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta. Very nice lady. She stayed by my side all through that terrible ordeal." Lisa shook her head. I'm glad you had someone here for you. I can't understand Lou. I mean, her own father. There are times when what she does surprises even me, and I should know by now." Graham sighed. "I'm at a loss myself when it comes to your mother." "She's not my mother. Not anymore. Grams, I may as well tell you, I came home to you because I had to get away from her and everything she represented. I'm sorry to have to tell you that about your own daughter, and I don't want to upset you, but I think if I'm going to stay here, I should let you know where things stand between me and her." Graham sighed. "She's hurt you." "I'm so sorry, my sweet granddaughter." "What did she do?" "I'd rather not talk about it. I'd rather not talk about her at all. I hope that doesn't upset you. You've been so kind." "Oh, you don't have to apologize for feeling like you do. I'm not surprised by anything Louise does, and believe it or not, I'm not blind to her faults. And if you'd rather not talk about her, then we won't. Not until you feel like talking. For now, you just get yourself some rest, make yourself at home, and do anything you want to do." Lisa's eyes misted. "Thank you, Grams." "Oh, you don't have to thank me." "I do. Thanks for taking me in and for not pressuring me and for keeping me in your memory. In my heart, dear. I've kept you in my heart. Lisa smiled up at her and patted the side of the bed. Will you sit while I eat and tell me all about your life here? It was some time later when Grams leaned over and kissed Lisa's forehead as she removed the tray. Good night, dear. I'll see you in the morning. Lisa smiled and snuggled down into the soft bed. Her heart was already beginning to heal. And that is the end of chapter 3.